Getting a couple of questions from people about playing Mesmer in raids, and I'll put right out there right now, I am not the best Mesmer I've ever seen play raids, but I'm familiar enough that I feel like I could make a video targeting people that are, potentially just trying to get into raids, and they're playing Chronomancer and they're looking for some direction. So I'll start off with letting you know that, of course, there are two builds that most people are running in raids with Mesmers. Two main builds. There's lots of variations within, depending on sort of defensive utilities, offensive utility that you want to bring, or anything like that. But the two main builds are sort of, you have your Chronomancer support build, that you're giving a lot of alacrity and you're giving a lot of quickness, and you're just supporting the team by being a boon bot, essentially. And so that's your job. Or you have sort of a combination of those two roles, and some people are running chrono tanks as well. And so currently I'm in my chrono tank gear, so I'll go over that build first. Sort of the idea with this build is that you're running boon duration build, boon duration armor and trinkets, armor and weapons, so that you can have the boon duration without actually relying too much on a revenant. That's sort of a bonus, but the idea is that you consolidate both a boon, a party support role, and the tank role in one, so that you can free up the additional slot for the tank or the party support and bring another DPS. So, in the ideal situation where instead of having a tank and a Mesmer in a group of 10, now you have the tank and the Mesmer as one person, so that you can actually bring another DPS. So instead of previously, let's say you were running three, like a tank, healer, and a support role. Now you can run two, where you have the healer and tank and support. The healer is one role, and the tank and support is one role, or one person, and that you free up that slot for an additional DPS. So that's where the utility comes from. Furthermore, I will say, I think that this chrono tank gear is actually more viable now because of the release of Wing 2, where toughness aggro mechanic is not as prevalent as it is in Wing 1. And so actually, even if you're just playing a regular Mesmer, it may serve you to actually drop a bunch of money and effort into getting Commander's armor, so that you can actually run your group without a Revenant if it so requires, and that way you have the boon duration to do that if you need it. So let's get on to it and talk about some gear. I will note right now, my main hand sword does not have a signet. I'm in the process currently of saving up for a sigil of concentration. Those are expensive. They're about 25 freshwater pearls, and I'm on my way there, but not quite. So that's why I don't have a sigil on my main hand sword. That gives about 33% boon duration on weapon swap, and so you want to make sure that you're playing with that. I'm not going to go too heavy into rotations on this video. It's mostly just an introduction to the kind of gear that you want, and sort of the role that you'll be playing in raids. So obviously I've already mentioned, with the chrono tank gear, basically you want to be running full, whoops, I have the wrong bunny ears on. Yeah, you want to be running full commander's gear and weapons. Okay, so you'll notice I have commander's armor here. That's the important thing is we're looking for the plus concentration, which gives you boon duration. Okay, every 15 points in concentration translates to 1 percentage point of boon duration. So you'll also see I'm running commander's weapons. And then the trinkets, I'm running the Assassin's trinkets, which this one, Delana's coin purse, is from the collection for getting all of the skins from Codicus's Manor, and Zaitan's Claw is the collection reward for collecting all of the skins from Arat, which is where I happen to be right now. So if you already completed those achievements, you can always buy an additional copy of these two from the Laurel vendor in any major city, or you'll have to complete the achievement first, the collection achievement, if you want to get them. And so they can be found in basic collections, and what you want to do is find the Codicus Manor collector and the Ruined City of Arat collector. Okay, so these are the two that you need to complete. Oh, pardon me. And you'll see I'm just using Berserker trinkets to fill out the rest of my trinkets. I'm considering getting Commander's trinkets, but those are quite expensive to get, as they're really only available in raiding. And so if you're already not raiding, and this video is for people that are already sort of not raiding, you can start off with the Berserker's stuff. I'm not sure 100% on the utility of the Commander's stuff, but it's something I'm considering, and I thought I'd put it out there anyway. In terms of the runes, you'll want the 6 set of the Chronomancer runes. The 2 seconds of quickness when you cast a well is going to be super important. As you can see, I have 2 wells almost all the time on my bar in this build, so that's going to beat out the additional boon duration from the leadership rune. Okay. Now on this Chronomancer tank, this particular build, you'll want the Sigil of Concentration, which I do not have. That's an additional 33% boon duration on skills that you cast or boons that you give out when you weapon swap. So you can look that up on Wiki. Again, it's the Superior Sigil of Concentration. I think it's going for about 165 gold on the TP at this moment. So quite expensive. The reason they are expensive is because of the freshwater pearls. But that's what you want on your main hand sword. Luckily, you only need 1 copy of the Sigil, so you don't need to buy 2 of them, which is nice. And on the offhand, what you want is the Superior Sigil of Rage, which is a 50% chance to grant quickness for 3 seconds on any crit that you generate. So that's just additional quickness being thrown out there. On top of the quickness on the wells, plus you're generating quickness on your skills, so that's quite good. So Tides of Time generates quickness as well as Well of Action, and of course time. So let's move on to traits. The traits for the Chronomancer tank build are, well, as you can see here, they're this. So you want to run Illusions, Inspiration, and Chronomancer. Obviously for Chronomancer you want to run 3, 3, and 3. So that's All's Well That Ends Well, Improved Alacrity, and Chronophantasma. And Illusions, you want to generate, you want Persistence of Memory. This is really good for when you need to get that recharge down on your shield, and also for your evade. No, pardon me, just on your shield. Because the Shield Phantasm is key to your survivability as a Chronomancer tank, so you want to make sure that you're getting the recharge down on that. Phantasmal Haste, unfortunately, as far as I know, does not actually impact your Avenger, which is unfortunate. And then your shatter skills are improved. There's really no other 2, like you're not wielding a scepter in this build or anything like that. So sometimes you can run Shattered Strength instead if you don't want to run the Phantasmal Haste. But it's a choice between these 2, I think. The Torment is not really a good condition in PvE. I mean, it might be okay on Veil Guardian. I leave it up to you. The key trait that you're taking in Illusions is the Persistence of Memory for the cooldown reduction. Okay, so we're going to make sure you have Persistence of Memory. Inspiration, you know, these are this right here: Persisting Images, Restorative Illusions, and Phantasmal Defender. Phantasmal Defender is going to be a key part of making sure that you stay alive. So whenever you successfully block or evade an attack, you're going to generate a Phantasmal Defender. That allows you to just maintain your defenses and also maintain your clone so that you can shatter quite often. Okay, so that's sort of the idea behind that. And then the Chronomancer ones are just fairly standard Chrono traits. And so how this build plays a little bit is essentially what you want to do is make sure that you are generating your 3 clones or your 3 phantasms as soon as possible. That way you can actually Continuum Split and Wells with the Signet of Inspiration. Now, one of the key things that I've experienced while playing the Chronomancer tank is you have to remember that your Signets also grant you Distortion, which grants you Invulnerability, which is quite nice. So that's another defensive option for you. I found the Signet of Ether more helpful for tanking than the Well of Eternity. That's simply because it allows me to actually, in some way, beyond just shattering my skills, control the cooldown of my Echo of Memory. So for example, if I use Echo of Memory, then I'm able to recharge it with my Signet of the Ether in a pinch when I need to. And so also the passive on the Signet is quite good. It gives you some healing for every active illusion you control, and with this build you're generating illusions all the time because of your blocks and your evades and the Phantasmal Defender trait. So that's one of the key reasons why I think Signet of Ether is a better choice. If you're able to stay alive without sort of messing up your rotations and relying on having access to Echoes of Memory when you need it, like me, then I mean the Well of Eternity is a swap that's possible. I mean you get more alacrity from that. It's a bit better in terms of team healing, and so that's always a good option. But just I prefer the Signet of Ether, I think, on the Chrono Tank build. The key with this one is just to make sure that you are using all of your blocks and evades when you have them available, and also to keep in mind that not only is your role in the raid tanking, you're also the buff provider, right? You're also still providing alacrity and quickness, so you got to make sure you're staying on top of that rotation, which is simply whenever you have quickness, Tides of Time and things like that, you just make sure that whenever you have quickness being generated by your Well of Action in particular, that you are using the Signet of Inspiration as well, because you notice that the two of them are on the same 30-second timer, so you want to keep those two grouped together as much as possible. And of course the big money combo is having your 3 illusions up and then hitting your Well of Action and then entering Continuum Split while this is casting. Okay, so that way you can get your 2 wells down, your Signet of Inspiration, and your Time Warp, and then potentially some other, usually I use Tides of Time, just to generate all that quickness, and then once your Continuum Split's over, all of those skills will be available to you again. Okay, Time Warp generally you only want to use within Continuum Split, unless of course you're really close to a kill and you're about to close out and you just need that extra push on DPS. Sometimes you can cast the Time Warp at that time just to make sure that you secure the damage that you need to push you over. So that's always an option as well. Now, so that's really about it for the Chrono Tank in terms of its gear and build. I mean, again, I'm not going to go too heavy into the rotations on this. It's just a sort of an introduction to Raid Mesmer. And of course, if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments below, or always whisper me in-game. My in-game name obviously is jacobs.9468. Feel free to send me a mail. It's probably the best way to get in touch with me with any questions that you have about this video or what I'm presenting. So with that being said, I'm going to move on to the support Mesmer build. So you'll see really quick the changeouts that I do. So usually this is what I use for the support Mesmer build. So I'm just going to do this, weapon swap, bunny ears, and change my armor out. And then you'll notice, so this is, I'll make a point right now to point out that for the Chrono Tank, I've found that the best weapon sets that you're going to be using are Sword Shield, and then the same sword on your main hand, and then an offhand focus. With the Chronomancer support build, I find very often you are running the offhand focus on your second set, but sometimes you will actually be finding yourself running the offhand sword as well. So you'll notice that I have a number of weapons that I swap to. This is mostly a concern for your regular raid Mesmer, okay? You're not really doing a lot of this kind of swapping, I think, on the Chrono Tank. Most Chrono Tanks are generally going to be running Sword Shield, Sword Focus. Sometimes offhand sword, but I would say the focus brings a bit more utility than the sword offhand on the Chrono Tank, and so I prefer that. So this is the base setup I usually use for my Mesmer when I'm doing the Chrono support role. There's a lot of different factors at play. So generally on the Chrono support role, you are going to be for sure running the sword shield weapon set on your main weapon set. There's a lot of variability, however, when it comes to playing the Chrono support build when it comes to your secondary weapon set. Now, generally, when you don't need the pull on the focus, you're actually going to be probably running offhand sword. Okay, and if you're running the offhand sword, you probably want to go dueling, and you want to run the finesse and then mistrust. The phantasms having fury, it just gives them more crit chance, and that's always good for your DPS, right? So the dueling line is a bit more offensively oriented. So you know, in those cases, generally you're running the sword shield sword variation of the Chrono support. So your utilities don't really change, but mostly your weapon skills are changing. The reason being is that the sword phantasm is the highest DPS phantasm that we have, and if you don't need the pull support on the focus, then you're better off to run the offhand sword. Okay, so then in that case your weapon sets are going to be sword, shield, sword, sword. But as I said, mostly I find myself in Wing 1 a lot of the times running the focus. The focus it provides just, in my opinion, a bit more utility than the offhand sword, and it mostly comes down to a temporal curtain. A temporal curtain with the pull, it's great for secret control on VG. It's great for pulling in the ghosties that Gorseval spawns, so that he doesn't eat them. On Gorseval, it's pretty good for that. And on Sabbatha, it's amazing for pulling in the ads when there's a flame wall, for example, so that your thugs are not going to be wrecking people and kicking them into the wall and things like that. So overall in Wing 1, I find that the utility on the focus is absolutely the way I would go. And generally what I'm doing is I would run... if I feel like the group needs a bit more support, what I will do is generally I'll run, or if I need support, like say for example I feel like I'm taking a lot of damage or whatever, I'll run Restorative Illusions, but generally what I'm doing is I'm running Warden's Feedback. In Wing 1 there's not a lot of issue with running the feedback on res and the Warden's Feedback to get the reflect on your focus skills. But the key one that you do want to be running in the inspiration line is the Illusionary Inspiration for the extra Signet of Inspiration. That's going to be really good.
I could outrun a centaur.
Of course, the Inspiring Distortion is pretty key as well for some of the fights that you've seen. So, for example, some people that are 6-man in Gorseval, they often do rely on the Mesmer using the Distortion at the right time to evade damage. And so, if you're doing something tricky like that, then you definitely want to be running Inspiration. Of course, that's sort of an advanced tactic. I'm not going to go into that too much more. But Inspiration is key for that. Now, the other consideration in Wing 2, so as I mentioned, I find the focus more useful in Wing 1. That being said, I find that in Wing 2, as a support Mesmer, generally haven't needed the focus as much. The only fight I think that you want to run the focus in, depending on what your group does, with my group we actually have the Mesmer bring the focus. So we do Sword Shield, Sword Focus on the Mesmer for Slothosaur. The reason being is that way we can pull in the Slublings and wreck them and AoE them down. But given in my group, we recently changed our strategy so that we are doing cut in through the middle on a couple of the mushrooms, and that's actually reducing the need for the pull on the Mesmer and on our Guardians running the reflex. So I'm hesitant to suggest very strongly that the Mesmer should bring the focus on Slothosaur, depending on what your group is doing as a whole. In fact, if your group is cutting through the center to cut down, to mow down and AoE down some of the Slublings periodically throughout the fight for Slothosaur, I would actually recommend bringing the offhand sword. I think it's going to be better. And of course, if you're running the offhand sword, there's, in my opinion, very little purpose to running the inspiration line, and so I would always, sort of on a first glance, depending on, without sort of the context of knowing what the group is doing, if you're running offhand sword, in my opinion, you should be running dueling instead of inspiration. And so obviously you want it's a bit more damage oriented, but just the reason, in my opinion, that you bring the focus is for the pull, and if the pull is not going to be helpful or needed at all, then I think the sword offhand is going to be a much better choice than the focus. Now on Matthias, I believe I'll strongly suggest that you do not bring the focus at all. And in fact, on Matthias, there are certain skills that you have to reflect, and there are certain skills that you do not want to reflect. And we've had success with just having the Mesmer bring feedback on that fight. But that fight is a little bit different, and well, Wing 2 is a little bit different, so I'll go over that. On Wing 2, the utilities that I generally bring when I'm playing Mesmer, so I stick with the Well of Eternity, I stick with the Well of Action, and I stick with Time Warp, and I stick with a Signet of Inspiration, but Reflex have been a really critical part of Wing 2, on Slothosaur and on Matthias, and so usually this is the bar that I'm running on Wing 2. So I'm running Sword Shield, Sword, and then I'm running Well of Eternity, Signet of Inspiration, Feedback, Well of Action, and Time Warp. The reason being is I find it nice and helpful to have the feedback on Slothosaur, just in case our Guardians are not on par, or we have one of the guardians eating a mushroom, for example. Sometimes that happens, and so the feedback there is nice. And then on Matthias, our mesmers generally are the main person reflecting his targeted, we call it the machine gun attack, which is the one that actually takes stacks off his shield that makes him vulnerable. And so feedback is really critical there. And so this is the build that I'd recommend you run in Wing 2. Notwithstanding the caveats earlier about Slothosaur, sometimes you might want the focus, and then in that case you would run the focus and change out dueling for inspiration. And again, basically the key combos for the Mesmer are going to be revolving around making sure that you maintain the 3 shield phantasms as much as possible, because every time they attack they give alacrity. It's not much, but it gives some alacrity. And making sure that you keep the Well of Action, the Well of Eternity, and your Signet of Inspiration roughly grouped together on cooldowns. And of course, if you can get that whole combo inside a continuum split, that's the way to go. And that's really it for Mesmer. For me, there's not so much a skill rotation as there is a skill priority on Mesmer. And you want to make sure that you are making those changes. So obviously we're going to talk about the equipment that we're running on the Mesmer. So this is my support Mesmer stuff. Obviously my trinkets haven't changed, but my armor has. And so you want to be running full Assassin's armor, just because the way it was explained to me was that the full Assassin's armor gives you a higher base critical chance, and that's what your phantasms go off. And so the more precision that you can get, the better damage your phantasms will have, especially because we're giving them Fury as well through the traits. So their base critical rate is going to be 67.19 plus 20%, right? So that's 87.19 critical rate. That's pretty good, especially if we're looking to add as much damage as possible while while fulfilling the support role. And so, obviously the Runes of the Chronomancer, again, for the quickness on your well cast. It's a bit more helpful on Wing 1 because you have the 3 wells, but on Wing 2 you still have the 2 wells because you got the Well of Eternity and Well of Action, so it's still pretty good. And then, obviously, I'm running the Assassin's Weapons with the Sigil of Force and the Sigil of Air on the offhand. Again, so Sigil of Air on the offhand. Because you have so much crit, you might as well take advantage of it. And that's it in terms of the build. I mean, if you have any questions, feel free to mail me. Again, that's Jacobs9468. And I hope that you found this Mesmer introduction helpful. I mean, the key really is for the support Mesmer about knowing whether to be running dueling or inspiration and what traits specifically to be running within those 2 lines. I mean, dueling it really doesn't change all that often, but sort of inspiration you have a bit of leeway. So, for example, sometimes you'll want to run the increased health and retaliation if you don't want the feedback on res. Sometimes you want the Warden's feedback so that your skills are reflecting, but sometimes that's no good, and so you want to run the restorative illusions, or just switch off the focus entirely and run the sword and go dueling. But those are sort of the 3 main variations that I'll run on Mesmer. Is the Chrono Tank, which I went over earlier, and then the dueling or inspiration with the 2 other lines basically remaining the same. But thanks for watching. Hope it was helpful.